Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Behind Beliefs and Behaviors. I'm Dr. Maisha, and I have some pretty exciting news and pretty exciting things coming up in the coming weeks. First and foremost, I recently, you've heard me talk about the course that I have, Communication That Transforms, Creating Psychological Safety Through Trauma Informed Communication. I created this course last year. I've been refining it, and I finally decided that I wanted to pursue continuing medical education accreditation. And this past month, I was approved, and we are officially able to offer continuing medical education. So I'm going to give you more information about that coming towards the end of the podcast. And if you are a physician or a healthcare professional whose accrediting body recognizes CME, I have an amazing opportunity for you to earn 22 CME credits with our course. And I'll share all of the information where you can read more about it towards the end of the show. Now, the other thing that I want to share about, which is the impetus for why I'm doing today's topic, difficult conversations, is a free online webinar that is coming up. And it is coming up on June the 6th, 2024. So if you're listening to this, maybe coming up soon, I have probably posted it on multiple social media platforms, but I want to let you know, because in the communication course, one of the big questions that I get that's consistent is, what are we to say? What are you to say during difficult conversations? So today in this episode, I'm going to talk about some foundations before we get to what to say. But in the webinar, A Trauma-Informed Approach to Navigating Conflict, I'm giving a sneak preview to some of the things that you learn inside of the course, Communication That Transforms, because it's about how to handle all types of conversations, including those ones that can be challenging. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. In our life, every single day, we deal with and navigate challenging conversations, and we deal with conflict as well. But I want to talk about the power of noticing and naming inside of these conversations. Now, it's useful to start by identifying, well, what does it I mean when I say difficult conversations? What a difficult conversation is going to be different for each individual person. And the reason this is true is because, if you remember, we all have these different models of the world. And because of that, and because we've all grown up in different households and different spaces, we all have different models of what feels difficult. We all have different levels of resilience around challenging conversations and conflict. We all have different experiences of what we've witnessed as conflict and difficult conversation. And so if you grew up in an environment where there was a lot of screaming and yelling and maybe even assault or abuse, then conflict really does light up those threat detection centers, okay? If you are in and anything resembling conflict, so let me just go back, anything resembling conflict, any difficult, even any conversation that occurs like a difficult conversation, so that gives your nervous system any reminder of conflict, will bring up alarm bells. If you are a person who lived in a household where you saw healthy communication, where you saw conflict being resolved in a healthy way, and also where the two people who were involved in a challenging or difficult conversation returned to a loving relationship, then you might have a bit more resilience for those types of things. If you grew up in a household where you saw no conflict, no challenging conversations where they were avoided altogether, then you have a particular threshold for discomfort that may not be as much as someone who tolerated a lot of conflict. So different people, whatever kind of background or household or luck that you had in your household, birth luck that you had in your household, will determine what your threshold is for what feels like a difficult conversation and whether that is tipped over into conflict or whether it's not. And so I think that it's useful to name that conflict and difficult conversations are things that happen every day in life. These are things that we're going to encounter with our spouses, with our children, but particularly inside of organizations with our colleagues. And oftentimes, the way a person handles a conversation, a difficult conversation at home, may be different from the way they handle it in the office, especially because in organizations, oftentimes there are these unspoken, they're spoken, but there's all these unspoken rules and etiquettes about how to interact with each other. And then we can layer that on top of the the various listenings and biases that occur with certain groups and marginalized populations about what certain communications mean. All right. And we are meaning making machines. And so this is why noticing and naming are so powerful, because when we notice both in ourselves and others, and then we name what we see. We name what we see, not the story that we make up about what we see, or the meaning that we're making up about what we see, or the interpretation of what we think we see, but what we see in that moment, what we observe, then we can actually begin to navigate and open conversations for clarification. And you may have heard me in the past talk about how powerful clarifying is, clarifying communication when there's disagreement. And so let's take, for example, a conversation that I had with a colleague of mine in which I'm speaking with her and I could notice her face was furrowing. And we were talking about a presentation that we were going to do together. And we were on this virtual platform, we were on Zoom. And as I was speaking, excuse me, as I was speaking, I noticed that her face began to do a thing. And I could have made any number of meaning about that. I was speaking about something that I wanted to put in the presentation in her face. And so remember, only 7% of communication is words, and the rest of the 93% is tone of voice, facial expressions, eye movements, whether you're making eye contact, whether you're looking all over, and body language. And so I noticed this body language. Now I could have made any meaning of it. I could have decided she didn't like what I had said. I could have even decided, oh, you know what, forget about it. I'm not going to go that direction. Or I could have even gotten very defensive and aggressive, or aggressive, I should say, and confronted her rather than just noticing. So I noticed and I simply said, naming, oh, what's the face? And we have enough of a rapport that I could say it exactly like that. So I would not say it exactly like that if I were, say, speaking with a client. I might say, "Hey, I noticed your face did a furrowing thing. What was that? What did that mean? Or did that mean anything?" As it turns out, her face did a furrowing thing, and what had happened was on her screen were coming up notifications, and she was getting a little frustrated with the notifications, and that is what happened. It had nothing to do with me. All right. Just in noticing and naming. In that same relationship with this partner of mine, I was speaking. We very often do this practice of naming. And I must have had a specific tone. And we were actually speaking on the phone. And she asked me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes. Why do you ask?" And she said, "You sound like maybe you're not feeling well or you're feeling sad." And I said, "Oh, no, I was just trying to do too many things at one time. And I think my focus was somewhere else." So again, noticing and naming, and it comes in many forms. It comes in many forms. I'm speaking simply about communication. However, we can also do this same thing with behavior. And so when you notice a particular behavior that's happening, whether it is you're speaking with a person and you notice an eye roll, or you're speaking with a person and they interrupt you and they're interrupting you multiple times. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Or if there is conflict in the room, if you're in the room with a lot of people and you're noticing that the temperature is rising in the conversation and it's getting intense, you can utilize this practice of naming what's happening. And I think it's just so important to emphasize naming what's happening rather than the interpretation of what's happening. So I was in a meeting a few weeks ago and in a board meeting, and a very sensitive topic came up about something that the board is working on. And as the conversation was happening, there were some intensity in the conversation. And what I noticed is that people were passionate about what they were speaking about. And in that passion, they were interrupting each other and not allowing each other to finish the sentence. And that was creating more tension and more intensity. And so, as I was sitting back and observing, I noticed this and I just raised my hand and I said, "Hey, you know what? I noticed that everyone is interrupting each other and no one is getting to finish their sentence." And then I added this in. It's very helpful for me and my brain to be able to hear the full sentence that everyone is speaking so that I can make my own assessments about what's going on here. So I added, and it's helpful. And so when we name what we see and then name what's helpful, then it helps to shift the conversation without throwing accusation and blame and throwing out our interpretation. I could have said, "Man, it seems like everybody's so upset and you're just throwing insults at each other," which wasn't actually happening. But I could have said that. But instead, what was happening exactly as it was happening? People were talking, people were not finishing their sentence before another person started talking, which constitutes an interruption. So, that is one of the very powerful ways to begin to actually bring awareness to another's behavior because perhaps a person who is interrupting, and I was in a conversation recently with a person who kept interrupting, and I had to say, "I am still speaking. You keep interrupting me. I'd like to be able to finish my sentence," right? That person may not have noticed that they were interrupting. They may have thought they were just responding in excitement. However, for me to not be able to get a full thought out without someone jumping in is very frustrating. It's very frustrating. It's very irritating for me and activating for me. And so to be able to name, this is what I'm experiencing, right? So we can name our experience. This is the experience that I'm having right now. And so it is very subjective and it's personal, but it also brings awareness to how another person who might be speaking with you is coming off. Okay. And so then you can then ask the question, is that your intention? So then it takes away from the accusatory, you seem mad right now, or don't be so upset. Don't get so upset about it. Like these are very unhelpful types of statements, or calm down. Calm down. Oh, whoa, just wait a minute. You don't have to get so angry. These are very unhelpful statements when you're speaking with someone. But when you name, oh, you know what? I'm experiencing, it seems like is also a very good bridge statement to naming. It seems like to me your emotions are high. Is that what am I reading you wrong? Right. And that in and of itself, am I reading you wrong? Is that your intention? Help me understand. These are some statements that bridge naming so that it doesn't come off as an accusation. And understanding that oftentimes we have to manage our own perception of what's happening as we name and being aware of that. And so that's why using language like it seems, or here's what I'm experiencing and I want to clarify, using language like that can be very helpful in bridging into this naming. And as we are naming things, it is very helpful to first notice our own internal reactions because sometimes, and I think this is where people get into really sticky situations of naming, is that they'll name their interpretation of what's happening without noticing what their own internal thought process, their own internal body reactions, their own internal biases, maybe. And so, in the noticing, it's very important that before you name, you notice, right? So, you notice what's happening in the room, then you notice what's happening inside, right? Notice what's happening in the conversation and notice what's happening inside. What's happening in your body? What's happening in your thoughts? What are the stories you might be making up, right? Where are you not speaking where you want to speak? Where are you feeling unheard? Where are you feeling that maybe there's unacceptable behavior that's happening, that's a value or a boundary is being violated? So that when you do name, you can actually name accurately your experience or name accurately what you observe. Like I set a boundary. I asked twice for you to not refer to me in this way or not to raise your voice at me or not to blah, blah, blah. And this is my experience of what's happening right now. It seems like you're raising your voice at me. And the person may not even realize that the volume has gone up in their voice. And so it's these are the principles of just these two principles, naming and noticing. And I have given you a few other tips and tools about bridging conversation. More of that in the webinar. We'll talk more about that in the webinar. However, it is super important, just the naming and noticing. When I've done trainings with organizations and we talk about what do you say if you notice, how do you approach naming, noticing first, right? First noticing, noticing what's happening, observing. Many of you know I do the three positions of listening. So from your inside your own body and then through your own eyes, inside the other person's body and through their eyes. And then the observer position, observing both, can really help with the naming, right? Or the noticing, rather, can help with the noticing. And then the naming is, we say just facts, right? If you're old enough to remember Columbo, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts, or just the facts, or just the facts. And so noticing and then naming exactly what's happening rather than what you think is happening or what your interpretation is of what's happening. All right. And also, here's one other thing I want to bring as an awareness, and that is when we're noticing body language and facial expressions, oftentimes we label the expression with an emotion that we think. And I shared with you earlier the case of when I was talking to my colleague, my partner, and her face furrowed, right? And so when we're naming body language, we want to, or we're like naming facial expressions, you look mad, or you look upset, or you want to be careful to name what you see rather than the interpretation. And naming an emotion is an interpretation. So you seem angry to me is different from you look angry to me. And I know that's a very nuanced linguistic difference, but it lands differently in the brain for many people. So I would notice, oh, I notice a change in your body language, or I noticed a change in your face. And that seems to me like, Am I reading you wrong? So it's an acknowledgement of I could be reading you wrong. I notice that you're no longer making eye contact with me, or you're not looking at me anymore when you were looking at me. Did I say something? So these are some of the things that you can notice. And this is some of the things that in the course we go a lot more in depth in. So with that, I'm gonna pause, and because I think that just in the naming and the noticing, there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of good work to be done. And so I want you to go and apply this in your life and share this with another person, a friend, a colleague, a family member. And when you see a difference in applying this skill or this tool, do me a favor and share your wins with me. Share what your experience is. And you can leave them in a review on the podcast platform, which is the best way for me. You can email them to me at drmaisha.com, and it really makes a difference for me. And if there are more questions that come up about it, please email me those questions, drmaisha.com, because then I can actually go and make another episode about that. And so if you are seeing these amazing shifts and changes as you're applying these tools, and your whether at work or whether in your personal relationships, know that this can continue on a larger level. All right. So if you happen to be a leader in an organization, if you happen to be an executive in an organization, this is something that I bring to organizations as well. Share this with the people in your life. And if you're interested in having me come in and speak about these communication topics, do workshops, please reach out to me. The website here is at the bottom, mindremappingacademy.com. If you're listening to this on any of the platforms, you're welcome to connect with me directly on the platform, or you can email me directly at drmaisha@drmaisha.com. That's DRMAIYSHA at drmaisha.com. Finally, check out our course. I'm going to leave this information in our show notes, and I will be posting on the various platforms. However, Communication That Transforms, Creating Psychological Safety Through Trauma Informed Communication, now accredited for continuing medical education, is available. You may go to mindremappingacademy.com. There is a healthcare version, obviously, for CME, and there is also a non healthcare version. And there are some nuanced differences to that. However, if you are not in the healthcare space, then you would click the non healthcare option. If you are in the healthcare space, you click the healthcare option, and you will see all that you need to see in terms of the course overview, how to reach out, and how to register if you're ready to go ahead and register. All right. So, with that, I appreciate your listening. And as always, I'm committed to seeing you empowered. These are the conversations that transform organizations, families, communities. And I do this work to create a bridge to a new future. So I hope that you share this episode with someone in your life. And until the next time, stay empowered.